All right, here we go. Welcome into Philadelphia 76ers Now by Chat Sports. I'm Chase Senior. Hope all of you are having a fantastic week. We have a fantastic show planned for you today as I put together a guide for the Philadelphia 76ers to have a perfect offseason. But first, I want you to help me out as a fellow Philadelphian and subscribe to the channel because our offseason coverage is about to get ramped up during what is going to be a pivotal, crucially important offseason for this basketball team, but also for such a long time. We were beating New York Knicks Now here at Chat Sports with subscribers. They have overtaken us, and I won't stand for this because I was in New York a couple weeks ago for my stepsister's wedding, had an awesome time, but I was looking around, walking around the city, and I was like, you know what? I don't like this city. There's distaste in my mouth when I think about New York, especially when we're losing to the Knicks with subscribers. So if you want the best Sixers coverage here on YouTube, make sure you hit that red subscribe button down below or plug in that link, youtube.com/76erstv. We got to get the 6K to honor the great Dr. J. Julius Erving, and then over time, we will beat New York Knicks Now with subscribers. Point number one for our perfect 76ers offseason guide. Daryl Morey has to consider breaking up with his son, James Harden, because he's older, he's aged overnight, he's a little bit slow, and I have no confidence he's going to come into training camp slimmed down because I think he needs to lose 15 to 20 pounds. But throughout his entire career, James Harden has never showed me that he prioritizes being in the peakest form of shape. And I have concerns about how he ages as a basketball player, considering not just what we saw this past year in a Sixers uniform after the Ben Simmons trade, but what we've seen the last couple of years, and now his game has kind of started to fall off a cliff over the last couple of campaigns. Now, when you look at his regular season and playoff numbers, you're like, okay, he played alongside Joel Embiid, Tyrese, Maxey, and Tobias Harris were able to elevate their respective games, and the Sixers offense actually played better when James Harden wasn't one of the top two options. But that contract option and the contract extension is looming, and James Harden is not a max player any longer, as evidenced by the numbers in a Sixers uniform in the regular season as well as in the playoffs. And the trajectory is going in a downward movement right now for James Harden as an offensive basketball player. Regular season numbers, pretty solid, right? 22 points per game, 10 dimes a night. So he was averaging a double-double night in, night out. He's still a really good rebounder for a guard. But the shooting splits and the lack of efficiency there are very concerning. And what's weird, he's not a catch-and-shoot guy. He has to hit that step-back three. And I have concerns about his lack of efficiency hitting that step-back three as he continues to age and lose a little bit of his lower half. 41% from the deck, less than 33% from beyond the arc, and then in the playoffs, 19 points per game, 9 dimes, a little less than 6 assists, and the shooting numbers went up a little bit in the playoffs, but the eye test tells you that this guy just simply isn't the same offensive player, even going back to the Brooklyn Nets days, and then, of course, going back to his long tenure with the Houston Rockets, which made him one of the best offensive players that we've ever seen when he was a scoring champion and an MVP. The eye test tells you this guy has lacked burst, he's lost a step, and I don't have any confidence that he's going to do the necessary things to trim down, lose 15 to 20 pounds so that he can maximize his ability as a basketball player and age well, because right now he is not aging well. And the two-shot performance in Game 6 against the Miami Heat, how do you shake off those cobwebs? I mean, they're lingering right now like the Ben Simmons passing up of the dunk in Game 7 against the Atlanta Hawks. And when you watch him, I just don't think that you come away with the takeaways that this guy is still an elite offensive player. Is he an elite passer? Yes. Is he an elite bucket getter? No. And that's what the Sixers need him to be. Joel Embiid deserves a dog. He deserves a foxhole guy. He deserves a guy like Jimmy Butler who has absolutely no fear. Jimmy Butler rises up to the occasion during big moments, and James Harden throughout his entire career in the playoffs, when the going gets tough, he's always shied away from that, and he's run away from it. Ideal James Harden replacement for me in this offseason. Number one is Bradley Beal, but replacements, we start to look at guys like Zach LaVine, who is set to be a free agent, and Donovan Mitchell, who could be a trade piece if you were to trade away James Harden after a sign-in trade, and or maybe Tobias Harris. Now, my number one option for a James Harden replacement would be Bradley Beal. Going into the NBA trade deadline, Joel Embiid wanted Daryl Morey to pull the trigger for Bradley Beal. Then he suffers that injury. He goes on the shelf for the remainder of the year, and it took that potential scenario out of the equation, and that's why Daryl Morey went with the apple of his eye in James Harden, which ended up being a mistake because the Sixers once again went out in the second round of the playoffs. Now, Beal is younger. He's the better offensive player. I think he's much more elite when it comes to putting the biscuit in the basket, and I actually think he's the better on-court fit alongside Joel Embiid. Now, his drop-off this past year was a little bit concerning. I think some of that had to do with the injury, but 2 years ago, he finished runner-up in the NBA scoring title behind Steph Curry, and I expect him to return to that form when he was averaging over the span of a couple of years 30 points per game on 47% shooting and 35% from distance. And that efficiency from downtown, a lot better than James Harden. And he has many more moves in his offensive pocket as compared to the Beard. So what do you want the Sixers to do with James Harden? I'd like for them to ideally move off from him, because I don't think he's worth it next year or in the long run, especially signing him to a contract extension, because on the back end, you're paying an aging player $50 to $60 million. I ain't about that life, son. S for stay, L for let go. What's the future of James Harden in your eyes? You let me know in the comment section. I want to hear from all of you. Point number 2 on our Sixers offseason guide. You got to target what this roster is currently bereft of. That's pretty solid wings as well as shooting depth. And in that series against the Miami Heat, their lack of depth was certainly something that was troubling throughout the course of that playoff series. And that was one of the big differences between Miami and Philadelphia. And that's a big reason why Miami is still standing. And that's something that each of the teams left in the playoffs currently has. More wings, more shooters. And the Sixers truly just don't have a lot of those attributes on the roster right now. Now, the good news is there are some players who are potentially going to become available in NBA free agency. There's a qualifying offer for Donte DiVincenzo after he got traded from the Milwaukee Bucks to the Sacramento Kings. But you talk about athleticism, 3-and-D players. Donte DiVincenzo, formerly of Villanova, fits that prototype. So too does Bryn Forbes from a shooting perspective. Now, he's not going to offer you a lot of defense, but he can space the floor a little bit and be a reliable guy who can knock down some threes from time to time. Malik Monk gives you athleticism, he gives you bounce, and he gives you a pretty efficient shooting touch from downtown. Victor Oladipo, really like how he's been able to rebound after a couple of quad surgeries, and he's impressed me at times throughout the playoffs with the Miami Heat. In Game 3, I don't think the Heat win that game without him. Once Jimmy Butler went out, he was good on both ends, and when he's right, he has all NBA caliber potential as a defensive player, and we know what he can do offensively. Gary Payton II, journeyman in his NBA career up to this point, but this past year, before getting hurt on that borderline dirty play from Dillon Brooks, he was a very good wing defender, a guy who was somewhat solid shooting the basketball from distance, but can guard multiple positions, and honestly, at times, even though he's only about 6'4", 6'5", he guarded some 4s and 5s. I love his positional versatility, and that depth would be huge for the Sixers roster to have. Now, we're going to continue to break down this perfect Sixers offseason guide, and we're only getting started, so buckle up and stay tuned. But I want to hear from you once more. What is the biggest need? The biggest need that the Sixers need to make this offseason in order to improve, to hopefully get them to the Eastern Conference Finals for the first time since 2001? Let me know. Now, still to come, we're going to continue to break down what the Sixers need to do to have a perfect offseason, because the pressure is certainly on Doc Rivers as well as Daryl Morey to make that happen. But first, if you want to bet on the NBA playoffs or NFL future bets, you can do so with our sportsbook partner, BetUS. Head to chatsports.com/bet, enter that promo code chat125 for a 125% deposit bonus. And if you want to bet on which team to win the NBA title, you can do so right now. Warriors leading it at -160 odds. The Boston Celtics, that makes me sick, at +225. Game 4, really impressive win. Now that series turns, I think Boston's going to win it. Miami Heat at 5-1 odds because they're a little bit banged up. And then the Dallas Mavericks +6,000. Get those bets in by using that link in that promo code for the best deal that any sportsbook has to offer. Couple more components to our perfect Sixers offseason guide. Now, this is interesting because the Sixers, after that playoff series, talked about it. Multiple players and members of the coaching staff. They said, we need to get tougher, and we needed to get some dogs. Well, in NBA free agency, you can find some dogs. There are guys who don't lack any fear. And it's P.J. Tucker, JaVale McGee, Markieff Morris, Nicholas Batum, and Austin Rivers. Now, I know it's a weird kind of, familial thing with Doc Rivers and Austin Rivers. Doc has coached his son before, but I like how Austin Rivers never shies away from the moment. Nicholas Batum, throughout his NBA career, has played in a bunch of big playoff games. He's not afraid to rise up in the guts of the game and knock down some big threes. Markieff Morris, North Philly's own. Producer Coop thinks he's soft. I think that's an absolutely horrible take because he's a guy who I would not want to meet in a back alley brawl. And during his off seasons, he works out with Chuck Ellis, a renowned Philadelphia basketball trainer. So bring the man home. He ain't scared of nothing, nor is JaVale McGee, who's won a couple of NBA championships throughout his NBA career. The Sixers need that championship identity, but let's focus for a moment on P.J. Tucker. You want a guy who's not afraid to hit you with an uppercut, to jaw back and forth, talk a little shit, talk a little trash, knock down some corner threes, who's played with James Harden. If you want to keep James Harden, a guy who can play defense, who will not shy away from guarding the Kevin Durant's of the world or the Jason Tatums. He won an NBA championship last year with the Milwaukee Bucks. He's played in a bunch of monster playoff games. He's trying to win yet another championship with the Miami Heat as he fits seamlessly into that Miami Heat culture. You want a guy who can improve your culture, who can get you past that second round because you haven't been able to do so, in part because you're mentally fickle. P.J. Tucker can certainly add toughness to this roster. I wouldn't mind signing him in NBA free agency one bit. Now, I think the Sixers are soft, and I've been saying this for a little while. The receipts are there going into the playoffs. I had said I like the Celtics, I like the Bucks, and I like the Heat all more than the Sixers. Why? They're tougher. They're ready for the moment as compared to a Philadelphia team that has proven to us that they're not. Type 1 for yes, they're soft, 2 for no. I'm going to go ahead and type my 1 for yes. Lastly, Sixers need to build depth. Now, I made this point previously, but let's look at the teams remaining in the NBA playoffs right now. Really, outside of the Dallas Mavericks, every team is deep, and when their star player goes out, they find a way to survive. And I think the Sixers in a couple of areas need to build depth. They need a bona fide backup option for Joel Embiid. A guy like Dwayne Dedmon certainly intrigues me to a certain degree. Bring back Andre Drummond. You can't afford to go DeAndre Jordan during some playoff series because at this point he's just washed and he can't play. I mean, it reminded me how the Sixers in 2019 had Greg Monroe as the Sixers backup, and every time he was in the game, or DeAndre Jordan, they got thrashed. They need some more shooters. They need some more wings. And I think the Sixers just need to build depth. The Celtics have it. The Heat have it. The Golden State Warriors have it. Anytime their star players go out, anytime they need a breather, they're able to mix and match some of their lineups, have versatility, and have depth. And that's something that the Sixers haven't had at their disposal, at their benefit for a long time. And that's what championship teams need. So the perfect Sixers offseason guide, you have to consider moving off of James Harden. If you let him walk, that's fine. It frees up a lot of money. If you can trade him away, that's even better because you get some assets back. Target wings and shooters. Get tougher. Get some dogs to build a championship identity in Philadelphia to really play into what the city is all about. Blue-collar nature, blue-collar attitude, and you need to build overall depth on this roster. Do you have confidence that Daryl Morey can get it right and follow those steps that I talked about? You let me know down below in the comment section why for yes, N for no. Subscribe to the channel because our coverage, it is going to be absolutely insane throughout this summer right here on the channel.